Okay, here we go. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown, coming to you from the new headquarters in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Still very excited about the new studio. If this is your first time here, you might not know what I'm talking about, but I've got a new studio that I'm working out of. I'm going to be doing all my podcast recording and a fair amount of my teaching out of here. And if you're somebody who was tuning in last week, you already knew that. In fact, I posted out a picture of me holding up the keys on Instagram, which then cross-posted to my Facebook, which, whatever, that shit. But I posted out a picture because I was super excited. And it was quite overwhelming how many people were expressing congratulations and support. Thanks to everybody listening who did that. It is a very exciting time for me now to be embarking upon this new venture. And I did a thing on the Instagram post that I never do. I never do hashtags, but I did some hashtags. And one of the hashtags was not a yoga center. And I got a couple of comments like, why not a yoga center? And my response was, you're not listening to the podcast. Because if you have been, then you know, I'm really not thinking of this as a yoga center. Not in the same way as the place I opened in Williamsburg, that's for sure. And I was thinking about, what's the difference? Why is this not a yoga center? Because I'm going to be having some yoga classes here, but that's not all that's happening here. I have all this other stuff I'm doing, this podcast and my live stream and video projects, as well as the new weekly teacher's call that I'll say more about in a little bit. And then I'm also going to have some classes here. And really, I think it's more about a mindset in the sense that when I had a yoga center, your job was to get as many people into the classes as you could. You've probably heard that before. It's the job of the yoga center to get the students in the door, and then it's job of the teacher to keep the students coming back. That was always the bargain as I kind of knew it. But I really think that is what has changed, that it's not the yoga centers that are bringing the people there. In fact, some of the things that the yoga centers are doing to get people there, like those crazy 30 for 30 deals and Groupons and shit, it's actually exacerbated problems, It isn't getting more people there in a consistent way. It gets them there in a cheap, gotcha, coercive way using marketing techniques, And that's what we've been talking about on the podcast is wanting to find a way to have business or to conduct classes and maybe be able to pay your rent doing it without having to do that stuff. So now I've got this space, and the key is just that it's lower overhead, $1 per square foot. So it's my intention to teach maybe 4 classes here a week. And I could do a suggested donation, $10, which is half price of what most yoga centers charge. And I would only need, maybe 4 or 5 people per class. And then the space is paid for. Not that I'm even totally relying upon that, because I do have some other revenue coming in to support the place. So my whole head is not the same about it. It's not the same process of trying to get people in the door, and it's not about a center where the teachers are, but it's basically, I guess, just me as a teacher and reaching out to people in that individual, more one-to-one way, and then people who are interested in me and what I'm teaching would come here. But it's not about a center. It's about the teaching and the relationship that would happen between me and people who are interested in that. So, for whatever that's worth, people were wondering, I'll be giving you some more reports. We did live stream the first class from here yesterday. And if any of you listening are subscribers to my live stream, I think you really want to go check out this class that we posted yesterday, which is Thursday. So when this post, oh my God, it's going to be Monday. If you're getting this Monday morning, you might still get to the class by Monday night. It might even be worth subscribing just to see it. It will be there until Monday night. But the reason I'm mentioning is because there was only one person in class, and it was Josh, my producer. And if you've been listening to this podcast for long enough, you've heard me mention Josh enough times. He's been on a few times, and we have this very wonderful relationship that often involves a fair amount of constructive argument, sometimes not so constructive argument, but mostly constructive argument. And you actually get to see a little bit of that happen, like our dynamic as friends and partners in the context of a yoga class. It was just, for me personally, a very special moment and a great way to inaugurate the space. So if you're a live stream subscriber, go check out the class. If you're not, you might subscribe real quick just to go see it. I'm very, again, just feeling good about the possibilities of it all. Let me mention that this episode of Yoga Talks is sponsored by yogalifestyle.com. During the 10 years that I owned a yoga center, this is where I got all of my yoga-related supplies. Mats, blocks, bolsters, books, posters, whatever you might need to help support your practice and study of yoga. Ray Greenberg, the owner of yogalifestyle.com, was on the podcast way back when, in January 2016. I encourage you to give it a listen. One of the things we talked about was why I chose to buy from yogalifestyle.com, which is because it's independently owned. You deal directly with Ray, who's a real yogi himself, and you get the kind of service that you're not going to get from Amazon. So if you're like me and you want to support businesses that are actually rooted in yoga more than the profit margins of corporations, then put your dollars where your beliefs are and go to yogalifestyle.com. This episode is also sponsored by our old friend Karmasoft, your complete online yoga studio management solution. This is the software that I used when I had my center, and I can say unequivocally that it is far superior to MindBody Online. If you or anyone you know is a yoga, Pilates, or fitness center owner, manager, or teacher, and you have to do the work of scheduling and class payments and accounting, all of that can be made far easier and more efficient by using Karmasoft. And I have been saying this since long before they became a sponsor. You can go back and listen to the episode from October 2017 featuring Karmasoft's owner, Rudy Senecal, and you can hear all about the company and my experience with it. I highly recommend Karmasoft. Check it out at karmasoftonline.com. Oh, before I forget, let me mention a thing. A couple weeks ago, if you were listening, I mentioned the Yoga Alliance survey. And I got a little feedback about that. And I don't know, I just wanted to take a moment to say that I feel I might have been just slightly unfair there. I still stand by things that I said, and I still want to push Yoga Alliance to be transparent. But the truth is that I didn't reach out to the Yoga Alliance for any kind of comment on it before I just threw that out like that. And it's one of these moments that I've come up against before here with the podcast where that line between being a journalist and just being me, some dude spouting off, I have to be, I think, more careful. I feel like it was a little bit irresponsible of me to just throw shit out without at least asking for some kind of comment or clarification. I don't know if there's a clarification to be had, but I know that Andrew, who I'm friends with, and I felt bad because I called him out by name, he's working hard to try to do this process, and he's in process, and he says they're working diligently and that they're going to be transparent about everything. And I guess I might have not given them the chance to do that by not letting them have a say. That's the thing. When I'm sitting here by myself, whoever I'm talking about doesn't have an opportunity to speak for themselves. So I just have to remember that. Like if I'm in conversation with somebody, that's one thing. I can say something to them. Like when Andrew came on, he can talk back and say what he wants to say about it and defend his position if there's a position to be defended. But if it's just me spouting off in this intro, I don't think it's cool for me to take shots at people. So for whatever that's worth, I still want the Yoga Lines to be transparent, but I do want to make a public apology for taking what I think was a cheap shot, you know? It's an old habit of mine, taking cheap shots. I actually just think I was in a bit of a mood that day, and I was feeling a little bit cynical. That's what it is. I was feeling cynical about the industry, and sometimes we look for targets when we're in that state. So for whatever that's worth. All right, let's talk about who's coming on the podcast today. Erin Heisel. I think I said that right. Heisel. Erin Heisel is a podcast listener who reached out to me after a few episodes that I had mentioned the idea of flow states to. If you're not familiar with the terminology flow state, I think some people refer to that as sometimes like a meditative state. Sometimes it's associated with sports when you're single-pointed in your focus and you're totally in the zone. And very often in my experience, and we talk about this, it's generally associated with high-intensity workouts, like pushing yourself physically leads to the flow state. But Erin contends something different than that, which I was very appreciative of. And it was just really cool. This is one of the unplanned series of grassroots podcast listener episodes. And it was refreshing to speak to somebody doing research into areas that aren't necessarily directly yoga, but absolutely bear relevance, as you will hear. Before we do, let me also drop my stuff. I'm going to be in Helena, Montana, July 14th through the 21st at the Feathered Pipe Ranch. There's still a little time left. If you were thinking you might want to pull the trigger now, I'm also going to be in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, August 4th on a Hatha Yoga. I'm going to be in Falls Church, Virginia, August 10th through 12th at the Yogi Underground. And I'm going to be in Rye, New York at Wainwright House, August 26th. You can find out about those gigs and more. You can listen to the archives of this podcast. You can read my blog. The post from last week got quite a bit of readership. It was about the idea of proper alignment in yoga. If you missed the blog post, a lot of people were commenting and talking about it. You might want to check it out. You can also find my online yoga video stuff. There's DVD and downloads. There's an online workshop. There's my live stream subscription that I was mentioning. And I also want to mention again the newest offering, which will be my weekly's Teacher's Call. And it's something that I'm really looking forward to starting. It's going to be an opportunity for me to have an interactive forum to engage you, the podcast listener, to engage people who are taking the live stream classes, anyone who's interested in the kind of conversations that happen here, or frankly, to practice stuff. Like in the new studio, I can be like having a video conference call and then I can go demonstrate stuff. Josh came yesterday, we worked out all the stuff. I'm really excited about this project, you guys, and more of the details will be coming out soon. I just want to be planting the seeds. If you're someone looking for an opportunity to have this kind of inquiry and dialogue with me and with your fellow teachers, then this new teacher's class is going to be the thing. You can find out about all of that stuff at jbrownyoga.com. If you're enjoying the podcast, maybe you would show some support. You could go to a blog or podcast page and make a direct donation, or go to Apple Podcasts and iTunes and write a review and give us some stars. We would so appreciate that. Okay, y'all, I have some exciting news about podcast guests that are coming up. I'm going to mention it on the other side. For now, let's go ahead and get to it. Let's go ahead and listen to this talk that I had with Erin Heisel. Hello?
Hello?
Hello, is this Erin?
Yes. Hi, Jay.
How are you?
Oh my gosh, I'm talking to you and you're not just streaming through my phone.
Isn't that fun when that happens? And I'm talking to you. You're not just someone in the ether listening.
Right.
It goes both ways, you know?
It's amazing.
Well, very fun to have this moment to actually speak to you.
Thank you. It's really fun for me too. I kind of can't believe this is happening.
Are you, I know you listen to the podcast, but have you been listening for a while? Like, I don't know. We didn't really talk much before we jumped on this call together.
I know. We're living on the edge. I love it. I found you in March, I think.
Okay.
Because I was in a YTT and I wanted to, I don't know, I'm not a big podcast listener, but I thought I'd like to hear some other people's thoughts about this. So I started looking through yoga podcasts and I wanted ones that were kind of a longer conversation, and I didn't want things that were going to talk about asana and structure and stuff like that. I wanted to kind of other stuff. And so I found yours. And actually the very first episode I listened to was your interview with Adrian Mitchell.
Okay.
Because that's kind of roundabout how I got into yoga, was yoga with Adrian. And so I thought, I want to hear this interview. And then I'll sort of decide if I want to commit to this podcast. And then I was like, it was great.
Well, that was a great talk with Adrian. That was super fun. So that was a good intro, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, the reason, just to give context for anybody listening, why we're talking is that on a couple occasions on the podcast in recent episodes, I brought up this concept of flow states. And I think both times I brought it, I think it was Gernot and maybe Peter Blackaby. I can't remember exactly, but both times I brought it up, I guess Peter hadn't heard that term before. I think Gernot had, because he's kind of putting out this idea of using practice as a way to like biohack your response to stress. Totally. And somewhere in there we were talking about flow states. And I said something about it because, I don't know, I have this impression about this word flow state, that the idea is that you have to have this like high intensity thing that's happening. And you reached out to me and you're like, no, you don't. I do research on this stuff and it doesn't have to be high intensity. And I thought, that's very interesting, because I feel like there is kind of like, I don't know, a bleed over between a certain area of like health and wellness and fitness that's not necessarily yoga, where they talk a lot about flow states, like where you're doing like mountain biking or like kind of like extreme sports, and like a lot of talk about flow states there. And then sometimes in a more like high intensity yoga class, they talk about flow state in the same kind of way. Now, for myself, I think there's also a lot of stuff in like yogic texts that talk about single pointed focus, and how when the observer and the observed, they merge, it become one. And I always thought of that as sort of like this being in the zone thing, even like in sports, you know? But I never associated that with it having to be like, I have to push myself physically in order to achieve that state. And you responded, and you keep using this other word, play, as like maybe like an alternative to flow state, which I really like. In fact, in my own classes, I've been really moving away from like terminology and language that's like do the work, and more like maybe you want to play like this. Yeah. And so anyways, this is like a long-winded introduction to why I wanted to talk to you, because you sent me some links and I saw that like this is like your area of research as far as I can tell. And I guess I'm curious to start, like, why have you come to having an interest in play or flow states, and like how did that become the focus of your research?
Sure. Well, my research, I like to use the word play, and I would consider myself more of a play researcher than a flow researcher, but you're exactly right in that these terms are used interchangeably. Both in play research, we talk about using play to get into a flow state or have a flow experience, and likewise, we do see play vocabulary used in research about flow. So there's overlap. I personally prefer play for a lot of the reasons that you just mentioned. Trying to, for lack of a better word, and not to get too much into the weeds with it right at the beginning, but there is something about a playful attitude and playing with things, and that you can play in a really intense, physical, extreme experience, but it doesn't have to be that. You know, you can have a play state doing a crossword puzzle or playing a game of chess or something. But how I got into it is I was in the PhD program at NYU, and I had a class, my very first semester, I took a class in the educational theater program, my degree's in music, with Dr. Nancy Smithner, who's a wonderful play scholar and incredible teacher, physical theater instructor, and she has become a great mentor of mine. But I didn't know anything about her when I took the class. I just read the class description and thought, this seems interesting. So
even just the term play scholar is kind of awesome.
It's kind of cool, right?
Yeah.
And it was my very first semester of the PhD, and I had come to NYU with a couple degrees in music and a real interest in embodiment and physical theater and improvisation. And this class was called Creative Play in the Arts, and the course description said it was going to touch on those things. So I was like, and I could count it. We had to take a bunch of classes outside of our program, and so I could count it as a cognate class. So I thought, all right, this sounds cool. I'll take this class. And it really was a class in play theory, and applications of play theory in the realm of physical embodiment. We did rituals. We made a big labyrinth on the floor of the classroom. We did physical theater stuff. We did improvisational activities while we read these really heady texts about play theory and performance studies and stuff. So that was my first semester, and then I sort of got away from that and into the bleak and black forest of a PhD.
Well, before you get into the bleak black forest of PhD land, I guess I'm curious, like, how much of play theory is like related to theater?
So much.
Yeah.
There's so much, and you can really get into the semantics of it. You know, we play a play. We have a play experience while actors play on stage in a play. I mean, there's all this overlapping vocabulary that is so rich and so wonderful and goes so far beyond those semantics that exist in English and in German and some other languages.
Well, I think that's true. You know, I don't know if you know this, but I have a BFA in acting from NYU.
I think I remember that.
Yeah.
I remember hearing that in a podcast and being like, go Violets.
I graduated from NYU. I started out at Playwrights Horizons Theater School, and I moved to ETW, the Experimental Theater Wing.
Oh,
and,
cool.
you know, it's interesting. I saw that you're like a vocal person, you know, like, and I would say that in my study or inquiry into like theater performance play arts, vocal work was the thing that I found most almost mysterious and powerful. Like vocalizing and making sound was where I had like some really big emotional breakthroughs that I can't explain. Like it accesses something in a certain way.
Yeah, so, it's all, you know, the body is everything is so interconnected, and it can be such a powerful way in.
Well, I remember I had this one vocal coach, his name was Jonathan Hart. That was his name. And he was this incredible man. And I remember he identified that I had a lot of insecurity about singing. I think I had fear of like my voice cracking and like not hitting notes, you know?
Oh, you're not alone.
And so at one point I remember him saying, okay, I want to do this improv exercise where I want you to sing your worst notes as the song. Like, try to stay in the point where your voice sounds the worst and cracking, you know? And like make a song of that. And I just remember like, I just bawled like a baby when I did it, you know? Like, it was a process of like embracing my like, vulnerability and like letting myself be seen and in ways that I wouldn't want people to see me. It was like a really formative moment that I remember that definitely bears relevance to my yoga practice, you know, like that state of accessing yourself, you know?
Oh, that's so beautiful. What an incredible experience. And I'm so moved that you've shared that. Thank you. And I just love that the way in was this sort of improvisatory confronting and embracing of these, you know, these things that we don't even know are there. That's just such an incredible, I mean, kudos to that teacher for such an imaginative way to get into that, and also for creating a space where you felt safe enough to do that kind of exploration. That's really beautiful.
It was, and I haven't thought about it in so long, but it was really formative. And the reason it's on my mind talking to you is because I do believe that that was only possible because of a certain play state that happened, you know?
Yes, I totally agree with you. And that's something I have written about is this, you know, how do we create as teachers of anything, you know, a voice of yoga, whatever, how do we act on that responsibility to create a space that is safe for people to experiment and be vulnerable, and in yoga especially is also physically safe.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, let's come back to that and go to where you said, all right, so you have this teacher, you take this course, it's a whole bunch of like heady like play theory, which I can imagine. Like I can remember taking philosophy classes and like the language of those texts is like so dense. So you're coupling that with actual like exercises. You're rolling around on the floor and making sounds too.
Totally. That was the best part of it. And that's something I really try to embrace in my work, is that there was this immediate connection between theory and practice. So you right away can see that this isn't just some heady thing up in the clouds, but it affects it could affect your life if you wanted it to in a positive way. So I took this class, and then the class was over and I took what felt like a million other classes. Mm-hmm. And I was settling on a dissertation topic, and I had done maybe about a year's work of research on something totally, totally, totally different. Mm. And it just wasn't working. I couldn't find the right angle, and I knew what music I wanted to write about. And I spent like 6 months, I felt like I was just banging my head against the wall with this topic. And I went to this, I had so many great mentors at NYU, and I went to this fellow, Panos Mavromatis. He's the head of the theory department, and I had gone to him because I thought I was going to write this music theory type dissertation, and I like music theory, but I'm not a theorist, and so he was kind of like, you're not a theorist, that's not a great idea. He was totally right. But then he gave me this piece of advice that I'm so grateful for. He said, you're thinking about this really not in the right way. You need to think about what is different about your life experience and what that is going to bring to what you research, because that is how you come up with original research. It comes from your origin. It comes from something that you have experienced that is going to make your view on some subject not what someone else's view is. So, and then he said, think about the classes you've taken here. So I thought, okay. So I went home and I was doing a bunch of other reading for other classes, and I just was like, oh, what am I doing? And I thought, I'm just going to go for a run. I can't sit at this table any longer. And so I was living in Astoria at the time, and so I like to run at the park. So I went to the park, and I went to the track, which is great because you can just run in circles and not have to worry about tripping on things. And
no street lights and cars, just round and round.
Exactly. You can just, get into a flow state. I mean, I didn't have this vocabulary then, but then later it was so clear what happened. And so I was running and I thought, okay, I'm going to take his advice and I'm going to think about these classes I've had. So I went in reverse order. So from the class I had most recently, going backwards through the coursework of the doctorate. And, I would think, okay, here's what that class was about. Is there anything about this class? Or, no. Okay, here's what that class was about. Okay, maybe, but I don't feel really enthusiastic about this. So this went on for like a while because I had this class in play in my very first semester. And so then I got to it and I thought, play. And then I thought, has anybody ever used play to look at music? And then I thought, what would that be like? Could you analyze a piece of music using play? And then I had to have the answers to these questions. And I picked up the pace and I sprinted home and got on my computer and went to the dissertation database and started Googling names of play scholars and music and play and music. And there were 3 dissertations, which was great because you always want to know that your idea is grounded in something existing. It's really validating and gives you a place to start. And so I started, looking at interlibrary loan and how can I get a copy of this and can I download it? And then I sent an email to Nan Smisner, this professor, and I said, can I talk to you? I have this idea for a dissertation. And Nan is wonderful and so generous with her time. She said, sure, come on in. So I went to her office and I said, has anybody... I found these 3 dissertations and I found some articles about this, but do you know of anyone who has written about play and music? And she said, I only know of one, and it's a dissertation that's right now in progress in this department, and it's about flow theory and music therapy. And so she gave me a copy of the dissertation proposal, which is a 40 to 60 page document that you prepare that goes before a panel of faculty, you get approved. So she gave me a copy of the proposal and I read it and I was like, this is it. I want to write about play. This is something that I think is really exciting for me. And so I ran with that puppy and I wrote this huge dissertation and it was a hell of a lot of work. I'm not going to lie about that. But, and I'm not going to say it was fun all the time because it definitely wasn't. But what's so interesting to me is they say when you pick a dissertation topic, pick something that you like because you're going to spend a lot of time with it. Yeah. And here I am, it's more than 5 years since I finished the degree. And I'm so excited about play still. So
you found the right topic, clearly.
I did. I found my baby.
All right. So that makes sense. That's why since then you've been writing about that and speaking about that. And that's just been your trip.
Yeah. It's my jam.
Okay. Well, let me ask you something else about your jam. Because I noticed this guy's name. I don't know these names. What's his name? Johann Huizinga. Seems like he's a big influence. So who's he and how did he influence you?
Yeah, so his seminal text on play is called Homo Ludens, which means people at play, a study of the play element in culture or of culture, depending on your translation. He wrote originally in Dutch. He was a Dutch cultural anthropologist. Homo Ludens, he wrote in 1937. He died in 1945. And it was the first book that we read in that play studies class that I was telling you about, that creative play class. And so for me, that was the first thing that I kind of went back to once I had read this other stuff and decided, okay, I'm going to write about play. And then I was like, all right, well, now I need a theory. And so I thought, well, Huizinga, and apologies if anyone out there is a native Dutch speaker. I've really struggled with pronunciation of his last name, but I think that is close to correct. We'll see
if anybody out there is Dutch and knows how to pronounce it in a better way. What did you say, Huizinga?
Heisingha, yeah.
Heisingha. We'll see. I'm sure someone will email me.
I will be glad to have the correction.
We'll be happy.
And so I went back to his book, and there's a lot going on in that book. If anyone out there is familiar with his book, I also feel like before I get into talking about the sort of, I don't know how far we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of the theory, but I do need to say that there are some problematic aspects of his writing, and I feel like this is something that I have a responsibility to confront every time I talk about his work, because he writes with a very Eurocentric and misogynistic, let's say, undercurrent. He only uses the masculine pronoun. He uses what is really, especially now, but really at any time, inappropriate vocabulary when he talks about non-Western culture. He talks about, savages and things like this. And I think when we deal with writing like this, we can either kind of pretend those issues aren't there, which I don't think is the right answer, or we can say that the whole text is invalid because of these problems. Or I think we just have to say, like, the vocabulary that he uses when he picks examples is really abhorrent, especially to the 21st century and 20th century. We have gotten so much better at being respectful and honoring the traditions of different cultures and things. And that's just something I just have to say up front, is that because I think it would be really wrong to just pretend like I was in total agreement with every aspect of his writing.
I appreciate that. There's this particular book that I like called 14 Lessons in Yogi Philosophy. It's a controversial book, but it does the same thing. Like, it uses man all the time. And like, there's certain aspects of the way that it's written that really are not appropriate in our common parlance. I don't think it's as bad as what you're describing. They don't call people savages and stuff like that, but even just in a subtle way that it's from this other time and it doesn't express how we've evolved. And
exactly.
And that's just an interesting thing too. And even in terms of yoga teachings as well, that, if this man maybe had views that we might find abhorrent today, did he also say some smart things that we can benefit from? Right?
That's exactly my point of view. And for his part, if you read some of his other writings, he doesn't frame himself in the same way that we are right now, but he does acknowledge, I grew up middle class, upper middle class. I have this perspective. And so, we're definitely free to say, I think your perspective is deeply flawed. But I do think we kind of have to acknowledge that he even, to the extent that it was possible for someone like him writing at his time, he did kind of acknowledge that. And I think we have a point, like what you're saying, we have to kind of recontextualize.
Yeah, I'm going to say, so setting aside this problematic aspect about his work, what about his theories were important to you?
To me, what I really loved is that to look back on it as a doctoral student, what I really loved was that he set up a way that I could grab a hold of the subject and apply it in a way that made sense to me, and that was conveniently a way that this other previous research had not done.
You found a little nugget that made it different. Yeah,
I found a nugget. Heisinger, he basically has, when it comes to play, his big point is that play is how Western civilization developed, and that is still a hotly controversial subject. And so I feel like that's something that has to be said about his work, but that's not where I kind of want to go, because that's not where I went. Where I went was, and he gets into sort of what is play. And he basically says, here are 5 characteristics of play. Here are 7 elements of play. And here's a way we can handle this idea of competition and contest. And I just went, oh, that's a dissertation. Here are 5 characteristics. How do those function in music? Here's 7 elements. how do we see these in music? And a lot of those elements, things like movement and rhythm and tension, words we already use to describe music. And then I had to deal with competition.
Yeah, what was that? You said competition and something else?
And he talks about contest.
Contest, that was the word I wanted to write down.
That was a subject I really didn't want to write down.
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting. One, we will turn back to this framework that you just laid out, as I think it's interesting and useful. But I guess what I'm going back to is this: is there distinctions to be made between play and what many people are calling flow state? And I ask because even just getting ready to talk to you today, I did like a quick Google search. And I think it was like on a wiki page even. And I can't pronounce the guy's name who I'm quoting. It's
Csikszentmihalyi?
Yes, that's the guy. You know, I wasn't even going to try to pronounce it, but I'm looking at how it's spelled and you just said it. I guess he's well known or whatever.
Yeah.
But I'm going to read a couple. I wrote down a couple quick quotes from it about the way that he was defining this idea of flow state, right? Mm-hmm. So it says, imagine the moment before running a race. Deep breaths behind the starting line keep your pounding heart at bay, and every second seems to be an eternity. Yet, as soon as the starting gun sounds and your feet hit the track, every thought slides from your mind. You are focused and sure, challenging yourself to achieve something you know is right within your reach. Before you know it, time has flown past, the race is over, and though your chest is heaving, you barely notice that you are tired. It also says, it also defines flow state as an optimal state of consciousness where we feel our best and perform our best. And lastly, and this is the one that gets my skin a little bit, it says, if challenges are too low, one gets back to flow by increasing them. If challenges are too great, one can return to the flow state by learning new skills. Yes. So it just, to me, there seems to be this implication where the way that you get to flow state is you have to put this really hard challenge in front of yourself that you're going to overcome. And then when you get conditioned to that challenge, which is what happens, you get better at it, right? You can do it with more ease. You then have to increase more challenge in order to get to that flow state. And this, for me, is in a yoga class context happening all the time, where someone works really hard to be able to do something with their body, then they can do it. And I'm saying, in my understanding of yoga and flow state, well, then it gets to be easier. You can still have the flow state without having to forever increase the physical challenge to force yourself into it.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I would say as a, I guess, kind of a workaround in that, because what he's really saying is that you have to have the appropriate level of challenge to access the flow state. But I don't think it has to always be a physical challenge. So when I think of yoga, I think there's, maybe I can't do a bunch of poses and that's going to not achieve a flow state for me because it is too far beyond my ability, or it's maybe within my reach, but I don't enjoy it. But there's this ever deepening potential for me to understand my inner state. And so for me, and this is where I'll tie it into something I wrote to you about the gentle is the new advanced. To me, I feel like that's how you can really achieve a flow state in, let's say, a gentle yoga class, or in a flow class that is not like a power flow or sweat. It's hot yoga. I call it sweat yoga, but because you're moving in your body, but there's this, and you're doing this physical thing, but there's this infinite potential of mind-body connection that I think for me is what I'm trying to achieve in my yoga class, more than like, can I touch my toes in this position? It's like, how does my body feel here? And am I feeling my breath? And could I feel my breath more? Or could my breath be deeper? Or could my breath be slower? And to me, that is a way into this sort of I don't want to say skill, because we don't think of breathing necessarily as a skill, but awareness of it, or a desire to tap into that inner state. And I think for me, that is the more exciting application of flow to a yoga experience. For me personally, I mean, I'm not into sweat yoga, and I'm not into power yoga either, but certainly for people who are into that, they're probably achieving these states.
Well, I can appreciate that. I think it's interesting distinction. Like, being kind to yourself is an incredibly challenging thing. Mm-hmm. Or showing compassion and nurturing. If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.